Hi guys, hi, how's it going? How you doing? Hopefully today finds you well. Today we are doing the next installment in my palette roulette series in which I choose a palette, utilize it for a week, come back to you with my thoughts, feelings, opinions, and basically review the palette. It's not necessarily a brand new palette on the market. It is me trying to capitalize on the fact that I have a platform to use and abuse the items that I have in my collection. Just trying to get some usage out of everything I own. And then we choose another palette for next week to come back and review. This palette this week was the Natasha Denona Bronze palette, and I hope that you're here for it. For those of you new here, my name is Donna. So happy to have you here. I am a lover of all things high-end, colorful beauty and self-care, and I'm also a lady of a certain age who is often told, you can't, you shouldn't, don't do that, you're too old, and I am here to tell you, no. You're never too old to do what soothes your soul. I'm going to be here soothing my soul. I hope that I can help you also soothe your soul. Let's lock arms in this life. Let's walk this journey together. Be the partners in crime that we need for each other. And yeah, I just hope that you'll want to subscribe before you leave today. With that said, let's roll into this palette. I'm excited to talk to you about it, and then we'll get you out of here. So as I said, today's palette is the Natasha Denona Bronze palette. This is a palette that I brought into my collection about a year ago. As a matter of fact, the reason why I rolled it into my palette roulette this week is because right before doing my palette roulette last week, I did my haul in retrospect. And my haul in retrospect for July of 2020 stated that I purchased this palette along with another one, and I hadn't even used them yet. And Natasha Denona is one of my favorite formulations as far as eyeshadows go. So with that said, like, know that this might be a little bit biased, but I think I will surprise you in the thought processes that I have for this palette. Number one, because Natasha Denona is my favorite formulation, I do have some critique on this, but also number two, oranges and the like reds and stuff like that, are one of my favorite colors to wear on my eyes, and I didn't have as much fun with this palette as I thought I was going to. I also love colorful beauty, right? We said that at the beginning, so I try and step back from the fact that I'm using a neutral palette and forget about those thought processes. Know that there still can be beauty in neutral. There still is beauty in neutral. But I think this is one of my favorite looks that I came up with in this palette. It's my last day palette, and it is using the darkest shades in this palette, which aren't the oranges and the reds. So with that said, this palette does come in at $65. It is one of the Natasha Denona midi-sized palettes. It does have a 4.6 star rating on Sephora with 326 reviews. A 4.5 star rating on Beautylish with 22 reviews, a 5-star rating on Natasha Denona with 7 reviews, and a 4.6 star rating on Google with over 7,800 reviews. Now, I know I said in the last one that I thought I was going to take a step back from really looking at the Google reviews and using that, because not always are the Google reviews based on just the one palette that I'm looking at. But as I went through some of the 1-star and 2-star and 5-star ratings on this palette, I did notice they were all talking about this particular palette. So I did think that it was important to add that again. I do think that I myself would put this in like a 4.5, 4.6 star parameter just because of my experience with it. This is a really pretty, like, mirrored, you can see me on my monitor right there, plastic hard case midi is what they have, and then the back is like this brown like silicone, and it does have the holes in it so that you can pop the shadows out and put them into like a magnetic palette if you want to. You open it up, it does lay flat. There is a mirror right here that is large from wall to wall on the upper section of the palette, and then this is the palette. So this is a 15-pan warm tone palette. It does have 5 mattes, 9 metallics, and 1 of the cream to powder formulations. It is, like I said, $65. It does come in at 0.67 ounces of product, which means each one of the pans in this palette is 0.045 ounces of product, which makes sense because this is half the size of her full-size option at $129, and those pans are 0.08 ounces of product. This is cruelty free. And in those 15 shadows, we are seeing 5 different finishes. We're seeing the creamy matte. We're seeing the metallic. We're seeing the cream to powder in just one. We're seeing some of the sparkling cream to powders, which is the formulation that I didn't know what I was talking about before I was let known in the comments section. Thank you to commenter who comments, and then some duochromes. This palette performed pretty well. I think that it performed right up there with most other Natasha Denona palettes. It performed great with or without primer. I did not see any kind of fallout with it. There's a lot of powder in the pan, but not a lot of powder on your face. It's just consolidated into powder in the pan. These lasted for about 10 hours on my eyes before I took them off. And when I took them off, there was a slight amount of fading, not a whole lot of fading. I didn't really notice it in an eye look as I was, you know, traipsing through my day. And I don't think it would have been noticeable to anybody who wasn't looking for it. All the shadows were super pigmented upon application. What I will say is this palette wasn't like bam in your face pigmentation like many other Natasha Denona shadows are. This was a very buildable formula to build up to a deeper, darker pigmentation if you wanted to, but it did take a lot of work to get there. The darkest brown in this palette I found was just a little bit too red tone and didn't really get much darker than what it is in the pan, and I wanted it to be darker because there is not a whole lot of tonal variation in the mattes to create that kind of like ombre eye effect that I like to go for. If I wanted like an ombre eye, I had to go like today. I've got this matte and then this matte, which is actually your cream to powder matte. And it's not necessarily the easiest cream to powder matte to work with. It's not as easy as the ones that were in the Metropolis palette, if you're counting on my opinion of the situation. But those are so tonally different that they do show up in quite an ombre effect. The other mattes in this palette, this one, this one, this one, this one, these 5 shades do not have a whole lot of tonally different baselines to them that make it easy to produce kind of an ombre effect on your eye. They played really well with each other. There's absolutely no voiding of shadows, which I do know in a previous cream to powder formula that Natasha Denona actually had. When you put the cream to powder matte on top of a regular creamy matte, some voiding would occur. That definitely didn't happen with this palette. And they all blended out super, super easily, like all Natasha Denona shadows, and that includes the metallics in the palette. I do have this metallic all over my lid space today and blended up into the darker shadow, which is just on the outer V. They all blend so well. This one has a nice almost red undertone to it, so as you blend it out, it kind of creates this almost like red outline on it, which blends beautifully into the other colors in the palette because all of these are very orange and red based. I wouldn't necessarily call it bronze. Much like the Juvia's Place Coral palette, I wouldn't necessarily call a coral palette. I also don't know that I'd call this a bronze palette. It's very warm toned and it's very, very pretty, but it's not very bronze. I really found myself wanting for a darker, maybe even cooler tone brown to go with some of the other like more cooler toned shades in here, and I feel like a cooler toned brown would have not done anything but given more to the palette as far as consistency or maybe even variety. I found myself bored towards the latter half of the week from using a palette that was very one-noted. I could not get very many eye looks out of this palette that looked different one from the other. You're going to see some pictures of some eye looks, but they're all going to look almost the same. And I think that that is kind of where this palette lost my love. I do like the palette. I do love the fact that, you know, it was super easy to work with. And I do love the fact that it was I mean, I could pop these shadows on with my finger and they still looked beautiful. As a matter of fact, I did that one day and they still looked beautiful because my brushes were dirty and I forgot to bring my brush cleaner out on the road with me. But it was just a very boring palette to use. I think it would pair well with like the Metropolis palette where you've got a lot more grains, or even a little 5-pan mini palette from Natasha Denona, or even one of the 5-pan full-size palettes that you can pop the shadows out of and put different shadows into. I think it would pair well with that. You could even pop some of these shadows out and pull in from a different one of her palettes and put it in there. I think that it's a great palette. I like the shades, the shadows, the formulations. That is a no-brainer for me. And when it comes down to it, formulation is everything, right? If you don't have a good formula in your eyeshadows, then nobody wants to use them. I want to use the palette simply because the formulation is so easy to work with. I don't want to use the palette for a week at a time anymore ever because I got bored with the monotony of it, to be honest. The mattes beautifully complemented every single shimmer in this palette. I feel like even the darker purple shimmer in this palette did have this matte to go with it. And the peachier toned creamy mattes went really well with that eggplant colored darker matte to kind of build a nice sultry eye. I think that the eye look that I have on today is a very sultry eye look, but I also think that it could be an everyday eye look for those that have to create more neutral eye looks to go to work. They went on fully opaque. They blended so well, and there aren't any inconsistencies in the formula. Like, you're gonna get the same from matte to matte to matte, except for in that cream to powder matte formula, which, like I said, I don't feel like was the same greatness as the cream to matte formula that is in the Metropolis palette. The shimmers in this are very, very blendable. They work very, very well to blend out into the crease area. They're shiny, but not like too shiny, except for a handful of them, which did have a little bit more impact and a little bit more shininess to them. Those ones did feel a little bit thinner, and I know one of them in particular was a chroma crystal, which was this true bronze shade right here. So those are specifically meant as topper shades. They are going to feel thinner because they are thinner. They're just not meant to be opaque in nature. Other than that, like, I had a really good time with this palette. There is a lot of duochromes in this that shift to gold. So like, you're going to get some beautiful eye looks. I just got bored with it because I felt it was very one-noted. And a friend of mine in the comments section was like, I would love to know your thoughts on the differences between the Natasha Denona Bronze and the Sultry palette from, or maybe Soft Glam from ABH. I haven't used either one of those palettes yet, so when I get there, I will definitely let you know my thoughts. But I am going to go ahead and swatch this palette, and then we will pull a new palette. I don't really feel like I have to bring you a whole lot about Natasha Denona because you all know I love Natasha Denona. I have so many palettes of hers in my collection. You guys have heard me talk about the Natasha Denona formula again. There are favorites that I have in her palette lineup, and there are not favorites that I have in her palette lineup. I would say that this probably falls somewhere towards the end of like my ranking, and I did a Natasha Denona ranking of the palettes that I owned at the time. I'll link up in the cards for you. I would rank it probably more towards the end of the palettes that I have, just because I didn't see a different eye look every single time I put it on my eyes, even though I was using different colors almost every single time I put it on my eyes. So let's swatch these. All right, so the first shade we have is True Copper. This is a dark orange metallic. Then we have Suntan, which is kind of a red-brown matte. This is her creamy matte formula. Then we have Sundown, which is also a creamy matte formula, and this is a very like orange toned brown. I think it's more orange than it is brown. It shows up in your eye looks more orange than it does brown for sure. And then we have this one, which is called Deep Dive, and it is an eggplant and this matte, but this one is your cream to powder matte formula. And it just feels so silky and so beautiful, and it is in my eye look today on the outer corner blended into the crease. And then we have Rhodium, which is a violet blue metallic duochrome, and it is on my eyes today. I don't know that I would agree that it's violet blue. I think that it steers more like, if it is blue, it's like steely blue. Then we have Magma, which is the darkest brown in the palette. This is a deep, like red toned brown matte. Then we have High Degree, which is a dark red copper metallic. One of my favorite shades in the palette, and it was beautiful with that matte right next to it. Then we have Alloy. Alloy is a bright orange gold metallic. This one is also a duochrome though, but it's like an orange to gold duochrome. It doesn't have as much of a flip as the other duochromes do in this palette. The next one is this one, and it is just a matte. It is called Ridge. It is the like yellow tone. I would almost call it mustard, but it is far more brown than it is yellow. So it's definitely not like a mustard yellow brown, but it is a maize. You know, the coloring crayons, there was always one called Maize, and you're always like, what the hell color is maize? That's what color it reminds me of. And then we have this one, which is called The Bronze, and it is a golden copper metallic. This one is a chroma crystal, and even though it looks really, really thick on my hand there, it is actually quite thin. It is a beautiful golden copper though. It has a little bit of like peachiness to it, which makes it a beautiful like inner corner highlight, which I used it as all the time. I used it once in my brow bone and it looked just stupid, so I won't do that again, but it was fun while it lasted. Then we have Gloaming, which is a beautiful deep rusty coral to gold duochrome. It is so, so pretty. So it's got a little bit of peachiness to it, a little bit of redness to it. It's like this rusty peachy color. And then we have Palladium, which is a bronze metallic. I think it looks a little like antiqued or patinaed. It's really pretty, kind of a little more orange than it is bronze, but it is a really gorgeous color on an eye look. Then we have this one, which is a duochrome, pink to gold to green, and this one is the one that is on my inner corner today. So, so pretty. And then we have this one, which is called Silk. It is a golden metallic, more gold than others in the palette. I would call it kind of a, maybe even an antique gold as well. It reminds me of like the old gold pieces that you see from like pirate ships and stuff like that in the movies, more than it does like a butter gold or a yellow gold. And then we have this matte here, which is probably my most used matte in the palette, and it is called Beach. It's just a warm peachy matte. I didn't notice any like horrible staining with any of the shades in this palette, except for this duochrome shade here. It does kind of stain. If you're using your fingers, it's going to stain them a little bit pinky. These are all 15 of the shades in that palette. I didn't think that any of the shadows were horrible at all. I definitely thought that you can get, you know, quite a few looks out of this palette. If this is your one and done palette, I can see people really enjoying this palette that really need like a neutral eye look. And if this was the only neutral palette in my collection, I can't say that I would be unhappy with it. I do think that, you know, just the consistency of the shadows and the ease of use of the shadows, like they're not hard to deal with. You don't deal with any kind of fallout. Even with the shimmers, I didn't deal with any kind of fallout from them. It didn't make a mess all over my face. It wasn't hard to get them off. It didn't bother my eyes at all. I didn't have any kind of like irritation at all. It's got plenty of duochromes, which bring a little bit of like texture variation to and color variation to the palette. Where I get lost with this palette is that it is just so monotone except for these two colors here and maybe this red shade here. Everything else in this palette looks very much one-noted, and I, at the end of the week, felt that deep in my soul. I do think that you can get some gorgeous eye looks out of it. It's an okay palette. It will stay in my collection because I love Natasha Denona, and I love that you can pop these out so I can mix and match it with other Natasha Denona middies in my collection. But if I was going to suggest a Natasha Denona palette, this probably would not be the one, which is why for me it would also come in that 4.5 4.6 star rating place, just because I didn't have as much fun with it as I have had with other palettes. With that said, I am going to go pick up my next palette, the palette that I will be going over next week, and I will be right back. All right, the palette I chose to utilize for the next week, because I needed a little color in my life, is the Colored Rain Juicy Boost. So I hauled this in not that long ago, a couple months I think it was, and I am excited to use it. I'm also home this week. I will be working from home doing, you know, touch bases and meetings virtually and whatnot. That gives me a little more time to be creative with my makeup, which means playing with color is something that I love, love, love to do. The thing that I know this will also help with is me really pulling into my singles and pulling out some beautiful shimmer shades for the lid of my eye, because this only has 3 shimmers in it. So for those of you who don't know, this is the Juicy Boost palette. This is by Colored Rain. It came out I think about a year ago at this point in time. That collection consisted of 2 different palettes, this one in a flat lay version, the same palette, an umbrella, a mug, or a water jug, something along those lines. But anyways, the shades in the palette were the same regardless of which way you got it, but this way is like the book way, so it's got these 9 shades here and then these 9 shades here. The interesting point is that there are only 3 shimmers in here, which if I'm gonna have a palette, I love to have palettes with a 50-50 kind of matte to shimmer ratio, which the Natasha Denona palette, again, this might be why I got bored. The Natasha Denona palette, the ratio was wonky, right? It had 9 shimmers in it, or 9 metallics in it, and only 5 mattes. This one has 15 mattes and 3 shimmers. So I'm excited. I don't think that there's any boredom, but also this one's got a crazy amount of color, and I'm excited for the color. So hopefully you all are also excited to learn a little bit about this palette next time I come to you next week. And if you are, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel before you go and hit that notification bell so that you're notified every single time I upload a video. I do come to you with new content every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday. And I would love to welcome you into my family here on YouTube and have you along for my crazy ride, and see you down in the comment section. I hope that you all liked this video, and if you did, please give it a big thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a big thumbs down. Let me know what I can do to make it better down in the comment section. I just hope that 2021 is treating y'all kindly. I hope that you and yours are safe and well and feeling healthy and getting along and doing your dang best in this world that we got going on right now, and that you're loving each other, but loving each other from afar. And until next time, bye, friends.